everybody, welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. So, it's time for the deep dive into the film Blade Runner, and this is going to be a lot, okay? I feel like this is some very interesting, weird subjects that we get to dive into, especially if you love the film Blade Runner. It's going to be a blast. But let's get going because it truly is a lot. So, first off, the different versions of the films. I already kind of touched on this. The most recent one that I've watched is the final cut. So that's going to sit on my brain the most when talking about things like sound cues and all that kind of stuff. But there are other versions, and they're all interesting and great and cool for their own reasons, right? So make sure if you don't have this version of the film, there is a 4K, which is great, but I think it's just the final cut. This box set, this Blu-ray, has 4 different versions of the film, including the 4-hour version. There's a ton of extra stuff out there. This is the way to go if you truly love Blade Runner and you want to dive into all kinds of crazy stuff. There's also the documentary, I swear, is like 2.5 hours on this thing. It's huge. Definitely worth checking out. Okay. So yeah, several different versions. We're going to talk mostly about the final cut here. But the other ones are going to come up, of course. All right. So the first thing that struck me when putting this in again is, of course, the music, right? On the final version, Ridley Scott does a ton of credits before anything starts. There's no sound, totally black screen with just credits popping up. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, was that in the other ones? Because this is really long. And then, of course, Blade Runner comes up and that boom starts, right? The music, Vangelis, I think is how his name is pronounced. I'm not positive. It's incredible. Right? Incredible. That shaking and the boom from that. And then there's that kind of ambient sound and then another boom, right? I love it because in a crazy way, it doesn't even seem like you could call it music. But of course it is music. But it's so sparse and so dark and heavy. Right? And then you get, of course, that cityscape, Los Angeles. And I think the year for this is 2019 is when it was set. It's always fun to look back at older science fiction stuff and see what date they think the end of the world is going to come or whatever, right? I think it's 2019 for this one. But it's just stunning. That music makes everything. That opening shot. You've got that beautiful shot. First off, there's these explosions coming out of the tops of these towers. I assume they're some kind of refinery plant, right? But then they cut to an eyeball that's looking out, right? And the only way you can tell that the eyeball is looking out over the cityscape is you see the reflection of one of the explosions in the eyeball. But they do this really cool thing where they curve the explosion around the iris of the eye, which isn't natural, right? It would just reflect. Your eye is a sphere, so there'd be a tiny bit of tilt, but they literally curve it around the iris. Like, it's a beautiful, strange, cool shot. Really, really wonderful. And then the music throughout is really great. Like the closing theme, right? When the credits roll at the end. This weird kind of 80s synth. It's kind of coming back these days, I guess. There's this weird resurgence of 80s synth stuff. But yeah, the closing theme is just dead on for that. Just really wonderful driving theme with synths. The only problem I have is really the love theme. And all these tunes are really long, and they go through different phases, right? So I can't just say in general, the love theme sucks, because that's not true, right? But that saxophone, that horrible choice of using a saxophone to go with the love and the sex, right, is just so tacky. I just don't think it aged well, to be really honest. It's not a great choice. But the piano stuff, the beautiful piano stuff with those weird ambient sounds in the background that kind of sound like a hospital, right? It's this really moody, dark piano line with these weird hospital noises, and the music is incredible. It's creepy and weird and cool, except for the saxophone. And it's such a big part of the film. That's a real shame, you know. But overall, the music is fantastic in this thing. So that's the first thing I wanted to bring up. So next up is the idea of replicants. So just so you're aware, I'm doing a deep dive into the film. I am not covering the plot. I'm not going to go, then this scene happens, right? I'm just talking about big ideas and themes that will be full of spoilers, but aren't... They're not going to be in order, right? I'm not going to try to just tell you the movie because there's no point in that. So, Replicants. This Tyrell Corporation, which basically owns the world, I guess, right? They rule everything. They make replicants. They make robots that do jobs that humans don't really want to do, which makes sense. You know, we're already there. That's going to keep going. You know, that's how it goes. The freaky thing about it is they want to make humans. They call it slave labor, you know, where this work is going on, because they are making robots. They call them replicants. They're making replicants that have emotions and have memories, and even in some cases think they're human. And the question that just pops into mind is why? Why in the world would you create machines to do jobs that humans don't want to do and then make those machines human? It doesn't make any sense at all. And they bring up in the film, Deckard asks, why would you give them emotions? And Tyrell answers, because it's easier to control them. Which is ridiculous. You don't have to control your computer in any way. If you build a robot that walks into a mine, grabs a bunch of junk, and walks out and dumps it at your feet, you don't have to control it. That's all it does. That's all it can do. There's no emotion. There's no questioning. There's nothing. Right? And I am a firm believer in science and letting science progress and do what it wants to do. But I feel like this film brings up a very interesting question, which is there a line? Is there a point where you're just going too far? And I don't want it to be a religious subject, right? I don't want to ask the question, should we be God? Right? Because as far as I can tell, we already are, right? I don't know. I don't care, to be perfectly honest on that subject. But giving something, on a most basic level, giving something nerves so that it feels pain. Why would you do that? Ever? Like, that makes you, in my book, evil. Straight up, brutally evil. I do get that nerves are important to protect our body, right? If we put our hand on something hot and we're not aware that it's hot, we're going to sit there and destroy our hand, which is really bad, right? We need something to say, hey, idiot, you're touching something hot. Get your hand off of there, right? We need that. I get it. But there's a line, right? There's a point where you need to be able to say, my robot might go into a place where it shouldn't be. And if that happens, I want it to realize that it's happening, and I want it to get out of there. But nerves are not the best choice, right? It's very simple to send a message, right? To say, get off of that, right? And to have your spinal cord or whatever, right? Your lizard brain react and get you off of there without the pain that's involved. And, right, if nothing created us, right, if you don't do the God thing, then that's just how we evolved. We were unlucky, right? We got nerves instead of a message, right? Which is okay, right? We're dealing with it. We deal with pain. That's part of life, right? But to create something without having the imagination to do it better is just insane to me. It doesn't make any sense. And I do not understand why the Tyrell Corporation is fighting so hard to create humans. As flawed and disgusting as we are, they're trying to make more, right? And we already have a system for making more, to be perfectly honest. We can make more. We're pretty good at it, right? We don't need to make more. It's just stupid. I don't get why the corporation is pushing so hard to do that. And I think that that's an important point of the film, right? To just kind of look at where's the line, right? If we find a way that humans can, let's say, live in a virtual world that makes them happy. If we find a way that that can work, but in order to create that, humans kind of become brain dead, is it worth it? You know, that's a weird question. Where's the line for scientific advancement? Because it's important, right? Anybody who talks about going back in time is insane. Right? If you go back 200 years, you would be so disgusted and so horrified. Right? We have a romantic version because we would lose the technology that we have today. Right? The disease is running rampant. The smell, the filth everywhere. The things that we've done are important and good. At least 90% of them, I would say. Right? Science needs to flourish, but is there a line? That's an interesting, weird question, and I appreciate that. Yeah, so why would they make those? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. So now let's talk about the Voight-Kampff test. That'll be our next category. So they developed this test where they can determine if somebody's a replicant or a human. And the Tyrell Corporation has taken it upon itself to create machines that the test doesn't work on. It's literally their goal to trick the police, right? Once again, this falls under the why category. What's the point? So they have this goofy little test, right? They set it up, this little arm comes up, and it focuses right on the person's eye. And in the opening scene, the person administering the test says, don't worry, it's not going to hurt in any way. I just need you to hold still. Now, if they have a tiny camera on this little arm and the little monitor that is just showing the eyeball, like, you would have to hold so still. Even looking to the right or left would be huge, right? And these poor actors are trying to act with this Voight-Kampff test that's 8 feet away from them, right? Leon is I don't even know if he's really trying to hold still, to be perfectly honest with you. He's just doing his thing. He's in the mode, right? Excellent actor playing Leon. He's moving around, he's looking around, he's asking questions, and how that little eye thing is working, I have no idea. And Rachel also gets the test later in the film, and she really does try to hold still. I appreciate the work that she does as a replicant. and we'll get into that later. But as a replicant, in that opening scene with her, right? She's going to smoke, so she asks, "Will this affect the test?" He says, "No, no." But she holds up her lighter to light a cigarette, and then she realizes that that could affect the test. So she literally pulls her lighter to the side and lights it, and then brings it in real quick to light the cigarette. Really cool choices. Kind of really neat work. But the Voight-Kampff test itself, I don't think is the most practical thing in the film. It seems a little bit strange. Also, they bring into question if the thing even works, right? There's a point where Tyrell asks, how many questions does it take to tell if somebody's a robot, a replicant? And Deckard says it takes about 40 cross-referenced. And he says, well, that's amazing because it took you over 100 to figure out that Rachel was a replicant, right? So they're purposely working to make this test just not work. And there's a point where the cops are just going to have to say, we can't tell. I don't know how to tell. Right? But at the same time, in the opening of the film, there's 6 replicants that have escaped. And then they attack the Tyrell building and 2 of them get killed. So they're down to 4. So there's 4 replicants and they have video of them, I think, being born. And that's kind of a weird way to put it, but they only live 4 years, right? So they're as old as they are when they're born. And they just have their heads kind of rotating in this shot. It looks like a mug shot, but it's not. They've not been arrested. They were never captured, right? They just escaped. So apparently you can just tell what they look like, I guess. And maybe the Tyrell Corporation was kind enough to send that over, and normally they wouldn't get that stuff. But that's not talked about in the film. So, it's kind of a problem. And I do want to point out, there's a 4-hour version of the film, and I haven't seen it in a while. It's kind of hard to get through, to be perfectly honest. There's great, cool things in there. But overall, it is 4 hours long, And I can't remember if they bring up, we got these from the Tyrell Corporation. That was very nice of them, right? I doubt it, to be perfectly honest with you. I really believe that they just have headshots of robots. So that's good, right? Maybe you don't need the Voight-Kampff. I don't know. And we'll get into more of that in a little bit with Deckard as well. So I question about the Voight-Kampff, and that's probably a good thing because I think it's a plot point. They want you to question about the Voight-Kampff. They want you to wonder, what if you decide a person is a robot when they're not, and you shoot them, right? So it's cool. The question is brought up. Okay, next up, casting. So this is going to be a big category, right? The casting of this film, I don't think went as well as it probably could have. I'm going to start with Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is not Clint Eastwood. Harrison Ford is not Chow Yun-Fat. Harrison Ford is not Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? He is not an action leading man. And I know that's a crazy thing to say. Harrison Ford is a trickster. Harrison Ford, his type is perfect in Star Wars, right? Harrison Ford doesn't play Luke. Harrison Ford plays the rogue, the trickster, the troublemaker, right? The bad boy that you probably should avoid, right? That's Harrison Ford. wonderful moments in Star Wars. You know, when they break into the little room and they kill the guards that are there because they got to free Princess Leia, and then the person comes over the intercom and he's like, "We've detected explosions. Is everything all right?" And Harrison Ford is like, yeah, everything's fine here. No trouble, no nothing, right?" And they're like, "Who are you?" And he just freaks out and shoots the panel, right? Because there's nothing he can do. That's Harrison Ford, right? When all the stormtroopers are running towards them and he just starts screaming and running towards them and they run out of screen and then you hear the screaming get louder again and he comes running back with all the stormtroopers running behind him. That's Harrison Ford, right? There is a cockiness and an intelligence, very intelligent, but tricky, right? He's the kind of person that you might be uncomfortable with every once in a while because he's going to jab at you just for fun, right? Like he's a very interesting, cool person. But I do not believe he was the best choice for Deckard because they had to take away all of the fun. Deckard is not fun. This world is not fun. And taking that away from Harrison Ford is a very rough choice. And I think it's affected a lot of his career because I think he's kind of part of the reason that that's being taken away, right? Because I don't know how much he likes it. You know, maybe he thinks it's childish or something. I don't know. But you get movies like Air Force One, I think is the name of that president movie, right? And the only thing anybody remembers from it is "get off my plane," right? Because that's kind of funny, right? Does the president own that plane? I guess maybe he does. That's kind of cool, you know? But that's it, right? That's what you get. And then you got movies like The Fugitive, right? And the honest truth is The Fugitive is Tommy Lee Jones's movie, man. He stole it. He stole it from Harrison Ford because he got to be funny and clever. And Harrison Ford was just playing this leading man. You know, gotta find my wife. You know, gotta find out who killed my wife. And I feel like Harrison Ford has not been as successful. And don't get me wrong, he's easily in the top 0.5% of famous actors, right? Everybody loves Harrison Ford, of course. But I feel like a lot of it comes from the early stuff. It's Indiana Jones. It's Star Wars. You know? And I feel like this is the first time he tried to get away from that sort of bad boy type that he is perfect for and try to do a different thing. And I don't think it's very successful. I hate to say it. And Ridley Scott isn't any help in that area, especially at this time in his career. Ridley Scott is all about what does it look like. You know, he came from commercials before this, right? He is only focused on what does it look like? What like, for instance, there's a part in the documentary where they're talking about the Tyrell Corporation and that large office that they do the Voight-Kampff test in. There's all this shimmering on the walls, right? And Ridley Scott said to the tech team, I need shimmering. I need shimmering on all these walls. This is too flat. And they're like, oh, okay, sure. What's causing it? Right? Which is a great question for the art department to ask, right? Is there water on the floor? Is there some kind of a storm outside? Are there clouds moving across the sun? Like what? And Ridley Scott is like, I do not care. Shimmering. Right? And it looks amazing. I love that scene. It's gorgeous. The floor is so reflective and you've got the shimmering on the walls. And I didn't think to myself when I first saw it, and once you establish something, it's hard to go back and work over it again. So because I didn't think of it when I first saw it, it just didn't come up to me ever again. What is making that thing? And of course, in the later Blade Runner film, which we'll do another thing on totally later, there is water on the floor. And it does cause the shimmering, right? They literally take that step for the Tyrell Corporation. But it's not in Ridley Scott's. He didn't care. And the same is true for the actors. When he grabs Harrison Ford, his idea is Harrison Ford can handle the character. I like him, right? He's got an interesting, cool look for the character. He's a very intelligent and tricky person, right? He might bring some trickiness into this. And I think Ridley Scott just would grab things that were unique so that people would watch them and stare at them, right? And I think that's one of the reasons he chose Harrison Ford, because Harrison Ford is so watchable. But the thing that makes him watchable is not in this movie. And I think that that was a problem. And Harrison Ford felt it too. He talks about in the documentary how there are two ways a production can go. Number one, you are completely on board with the director. You have lengthy conversations about your character and about the direction that you need to be going in to satisfy the overall artistic thrust of the film. Or you are just expected to do your job. And of course, you do it to the best of your ability. Neither of these are saying do a bad job in the movie, right? That is not the comparison that's being made. He literally says you just show up to work, you stay in the moment with your other person, you finish the work, and you leave. And at the end of the day, it's just a movie, right? And he goes on to swear about it, right? He says, F it, right? So that's how he felt about Blade Runner, was he began to realize that he was a piece of a gigantic puzzle that the director did not have time to get intellectual with him about, you know? And that hurt it, you know? Because the movie's not made to showcase Harrison Ford the way he needs to be showcased to be Harrison Ford, right? To be Indiana Jones or to be Han Solo, right? So that was the beginning of a problem. Then they go on to cast Sean Young, right? They want to cast the character of Rachel. So they bring in a bunch of different people, and Ridley Scott does ask Harrison Ford which one he prefers of the people that they brought in, and he says who he wants, and then Ridley Scott says, I want Sean Young. And what Ridley Scott wants, Ridley Scott gets. Like, that's it. And Ridley Scott does, in the documentary, say that once the decision was made, Harrison Ford was 100% professional the whole time. You know, even though if you watch the outtakes, there are moments when Harrison Ford will be working with Sean Young, and then when they cut, he turns to the camera and will give it a kind of a look, right? And I do know that we can't read his mind, right? Was he referring to Sean Young at that time? Was he referring to himself at that time? He could have hated what he just did, right? He's very complimentary towards Sean Young when he talks about her. Of course, everybody is complimentary about everybody, regardless of what they really think, right? But those outtakes are kind of telling, you know? Like the crux of this film, the heart of this film, is the two of them falling in love with each other forever. And that just doesn't really happen, you know? She's super young in the movie. As an actress, she's a very young actress that they cast in the film. So she doesn't have a lot of experience, right? Ridley cast her because he could tell that with the right makeup and the right angles for shooting and all that with the right costumes, she would look like a replicant. Like you literally would look at her, and they do this amazing thing where they make her eyes glow like the owl's eyes or like a cat's eyes. You know, when a cat or a dog looks at you at night and their eyes are doing that glowy thing, they make her eyes do that in the film. And it's stunning, right? You don't know she's a replicant yet, but seeing that, and everything is so perfectly in place. Her every hair and every, her lipstick and blah, 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 right? It's incredible. It's an amazing choice. But then she has to fall in love with a human, and they have to be romantic together. It just got really weird, and it went very weird for her because there wasn't originally a sex scene in the original script, and I need to clarify this a tiny bit because they did get another writer, right? The first writer did not put a sex scene in, and the producers came to him and said, "You need to put a sex scene in because it makes more money. We need a sex scene in this movie." And the writer got all mad and was talking about, "No, you're going to ruin the film, blah, 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 blah." And that's when they got rid of him and got a second writer, right? And the second writer helped out the script in many ways, I'm sure. But they also put the sex scene in, right? Because it was a requirement. So you've got this young actress who now has to do this sex scene. She's already nervous, right? Now she has to do a sex scene, and it got super awkward. The whole thing is so awkward and so weird. And on top of that, they talk about in the documentary how one person does, and I think they're just defending the choice, to be perfectly honest. One person brings up that if you watch the 4-hour version, the sex scene isn't nearly as violent as what they had to cut it down to, because they had to cut all the subtlety out of it, right? And I assume there's probably an argument for that, right? If you've got a 20-minute scene and you have to cut it down to 4, it's going to look different. I totally get that, right? But I do not believe that justifies the weirdness that is the sex scene in Blade Runner, And part of the major problem is the casting. Hurting Harrison Ford by not putting him in a character type that is good for him, and then grabbing Sean Young, who's a brand new actress, very nervous about the whole thing, and then putting all of that weird sort of noir detective crap over the top of this, what should be a very heartfelt human gaining of emotion for each other and empathy for each other, and it's a mess. It's a mess. I think probably the worst parts of Blade Runner are the Harrison Ford, Sean Young parts. The stuff in the apartment is just not great. And there's great moments in it, right? Harrison Ford gets to shine a tiny bit every once in a while. There's this great moment where he falls asleep. He's got like this bottle of alcohol on him, and he's laying back and he falls asleep. And then he wakes up and he tries to sit up, but he forgets he has the alcohol. So it starts to spill and he has to grab it, and you know what I mean? An excellent Harrison Ford moment. That's brilliant because he's this scrappy underdog, right? And that's perfect for him. But overall, it's hard to watch. It's rough. But on the flip side of that are the replicants, right? Roy Batty and Pris and Leon, and I forget the fourth one's name. Unfortunately, they kill her off so quickly that you don't get a lot from her, but there is some incredible stuff. We'll start with her. I mean, her performance is so good, right? She comes off the stage. Harrison Ford's there playing this really weird character because he's a detective and he's got to, right? He wants to search her dressing room, so he's got to make up an excuse. He knows she's a replicant. He knows it. one thing we're going to get into in a little bit here is the chicken head idea and how bad of a cop Harrison Ford actually is in this movie. He's terrible. He's a terrible cop. But in this scene, right, he just finds an excuse to get in her dressing room, and he's trying to search around to find clues, I guess. Maybe he's trying to figure out where they are now, right? Because once everything went wrong in the Tyrell Corporation and Leon killed the cop, they had to leave the hotel. So maybe he's trying to figure out where they are now. And that's legitimate, right? He wants to search her dressing room. Why he didn't go search her dressing room while she was on the stage, I'm not sure. Although actually, that may not be a legit concern because she shares a dressing room, I believe. I believe there's more than one person in there. So he's searching through her dressing room. She is getting a really bad vibe from him, and she kind of figures out that this guy is lying, which tells her that this guy is probably a cop and probably looking for them, especially since Leon killed someone. So she attacks him, right? She's part of this weird murder squad, and all of the actors playing these creatures do an amazing job of kind of being children, right? They feel their feelings and their emotions are so strong because they've only been alive for like a year, right? Or I guess in Roy's case, he's been alive about 4 years, but that makes him a 4-year-old, right? Even with planted memories, he's 4 years old, right? So this childness comes out of them, and there's this weird moment where she knocks him down, right? And then she decides, I'm going to have to kill this guy. I think I'm going to strangle him. And she gets this weird look on her face, like this weird pleasure that she's about to kill this guy. And she slowly bends down and grabs his necktie and starts choking him with it. And Harrison Ford is genius in this, right? This is why I believe Harrison Ford was cast, was to get the crap kicked out of him by robots. It's incredible to watch. He does such an amazing job of being in trouble, right? It's perfect for him. It's too bad all that other stuff is there because this is amazing. So, right, she's beating him up, and people come in the dressing room. And at that point, she freaks out and she realizes she needs to get out of there. So she just runs, right? Typical child thing to do, just run. And Harrison Ford has to chase her. And they do this incredible stuff where he has a hard time finding her because she'll hide. But when he finds her, he's going to shoot her. So he always points his gun at her when he finds her. And she sees him and panics and runs again. And these little interactions are so cool to watch. She just does such an amazing job. And he can't get a clear shot, of course, because it's very crowded. So she's just bolting and terrified. And finally, he gets to the point where he can get a clear shot as she's running away. And he shoots her in the back like 3 times. Like, it's intense, right? And it's a really neat way to build empathy for these replicants. Everything is working in the replicants' favor in these scenes. You just watching the replicants and watching the city and watching the cars, watching the art direction is just mind-blowingly good. And then they make the mistake of pulling everything into this tiny room. You know, and they do talk about how the original writer had written a script that all took place in one room. It was just a conversation, really, you know. And to grab Ridley Scott, who was at this time was known for visuals for Alien, of course, right? To grab Ridley Scott completely goes against that. And Ridley Scott's going mad creating this gigantic world. But there's still some scenes that just take place in a room, you know? No matter how fancy they try to make that room, it's just two people talking, and they do not have the best two people for that. But she's incredible. She does an amazing job. And then we get to Leon. Now, we see Leon in the beginning, of course, and he does this great thing where I feel like he's playing like he's two. I mean, seriously, he is stunted, right? He's looking around and he's kind of paranoid and he's kind of weird. Somehow he's got a gun. I don't know how he snuck a gun into work and then in to see this cop, but he's got a gun, right? And the cop's asking him, why don't you help this turtle? And he's freaking out, right? Like, I can't believe the cop couldn't tell. Although, and we'll get into Chickenhead in a little bit, right? Yeah, let's save that. He's freaking out. The cop can't tell he's a robot, and then the cop asks about his mom, and Leon just blows him away, right? Literally blasts him through the wall. He shoots him so hard, right? So, Leon basically sees Harrison Ford kill his friend, right? So Harrison Ford sees Rachel in the crowd, goes running for Rachel because they're in love or almost or whatever. But Leon grabs him, right, and pulls him over. And Harrison Ford does this amazing thing where when he grabs him and pulls him over, the first thing Harrison Ford does is go, Leon, right? Which is just incredible, right? That he knows so well what they look like just from seeing those little pictures, right? And he's been doing his cop homework, right? He knows what they look like, but he's so shocked that he just ran into Leon out of nowhere, and Leon just beats the crap out of him. I mean, he's smacking him and he's throwing him into things, and he has that really crazy line where he says, wake up, time to die, right? Just insane, weird. And he's going to poke him in the eyes. That's how he's going to kill him. He's going to poke his fingers into his brain, I guess, and kill him, right? Which is just crazy, insane, and dark and weird. But then, of course, Rachel shoots him, right? Shoots him in the head, kills him. Rachel saves him, and that's how Leon goes, right? It's such a wonderful character. There's another great scene with Leon where Leon has photographs, and he wants the photographs and he likes the photographs. Not only does he have made up photographs of him as a child, but he also has photographs of the current group, right? Which is how Harrison Ford finds a clue. We'll get into that. But he goes back to get his photographs, and of course Harrison Ford's at the hotel because he killed someone. So the cops show up to where they live to see if anybody's still there or if they can find some clues as to where they've gone, right? So he bumps into Rutger Hauer, and he's like, I couldn't get my pictures. Rutger Hauer does such an incredible job in this. Honestly, I can't tell. In the beginning, right, did you get your precious photographs? I feel like he's Irish, you know? I mean, he's making such weird, bold, crazy choices as an actor. Like, weird things are happening, and it's so incredible to watch. That's kind of all we get from Leon, but he's such a great character, really enjoyable. Then Pris, right? We run into Pris here. Oh, no, that's not true. Sorry. There is the eyeball scene, right? Of course. A beautiful transition. They cut from the photograph thing. The camera pans over, and there's all these people riding by on their bikes, right? Because it's a very crowded city. And then they're able to cut around, and you see that they're walking to a place where eyes are made for replicants. So they go into the eyeball place, and they need to figure out how they can get into the Tyrell Corporation. Because they only have a 4-year lifespan, and they want to live longer. So, of course, they torture the eyeball guy, and he ends up telling them that J.F. Sebastian, is probably the best way into the building. So then they send Pris to get with J.F. Sebastian so that they can convince him to get them into the building. And she does such an incredible job. They they show they talk about the screen tests, right? Ridley Scott had 4 or 5 women brought in, and he just put them in the costume slash makeup department and said, "Make your character, come and do the scene." So everybody made their characters, and Daryl Hannah talks about how she found this crazy wig that she really loved, so she put on this weird wig, and she really blacked out her eyes because she had just seen, I think she said, a version of Frankenstein. I think she'd seen a German film, a German monster film, and they had their eyes blacked out, so she put black all the way around her eyes, and then she came out to meet with the other women so they could each do the scene, and all of them were gorgeous. Right? They'd all done doll makeup and beautiful hair, and she was like, "Oh my god, I did it wrong," right? So they do the scene, and it's literally the scene from the film, straight up. And Ridley says, she's the one. Daryl Hannah's the one. Because, of course, Ridley Scott, 2 things. Number one, he is too consumed with creating this weird world and making sure that things are visually stunning to help the actors do their thing. He needs actors who have already done their thing, right? The actors need to do their job for Ridley Scott. It's not a discussion. They just need to do their job. And Daryl Hannah, he took one look at her and went, "That is the craziest, weirdest, unique thing I've ever seen. People will glue their eyes to that. She's the one." And literally in the film, if you watch the outtake and then what they shot in the film, she's wearing the exact same stuff. Like, they didn't even make a costume for her. They literally just used what she picked. It's the same wig, you know? So, yeah, she was the perfect choice. And she does so incredible when she's meeting with J.F. Sebastian because, well, for starters, she knows she has to be there. She walks up. It's kind of scary music, right? She gets planted by his front door, and she's just waiting. She buries herself in trash, right? And he comes up, drops his keys on accident, and she acts like it terrifies her, right? She gets all freaked out. She gets up. She goes running away, and she literally trips and falls into his truck and breaks the door. Like, she shatters the glass in the door of the truck, which was total accident. She says that they'd done like 15 takes, and of course they chose the one that she fell and broke the prop truck, you know. Luckily they don't use it anymore. That's the only time I think we see J.F. Sebastian's truck. But she cut herself bad. She broke her elbow a little bit. They had to pull pieces out, and right, weirdness, but it looks so good, right? The Ridley Scott, of course, is going to keep it. So then they start talking with each other, and she plays it really dark, right? Like, "I'm in trouble. I need help. Something's wrong." And J.F. Sebastian just isn't biting, right? He's like, "Oh my God," right? So he turns to leave, and she instantly flips. Brilliant, brilliant, right? And I shouldn't say instantly, right? She's working her transitions. She realizes, crap, what I'm doing isn't working. And she jumps on a completely different tactic where she says, "Boy, we really scared each other, didn't we?" Right? And instantly he's back, right? She gets him back. It's a brilliant moment in the film. Seriously, acting moment. Really, really good. She gets him back. They sort of talk about being friends, and then she says, "I'm really hungry. Can you help me?" And he says, "Yes, I've got food inside." So she's just so excellent. All of those choices, and not forgetting, he says, "Yeah, I got food." He turns around to walk away, and she just goes cold, like empty, like that. It's so brilliant seeing her be a replicant, you know? And she goes with him inside. So she's great. And then, of course, Rutger Hauer just kills it in this. I mean, he's so childish because he's only 4, and yet so powerful and intelligent, right? He's super intelligent. And he talked with, they talk about in the documentary, he talked with Ridley Scott and said, I want to do this. I want to have childlike moments, and I want to have passionate moments, and I want to have love moments, and I want to have, and Ridley was like, dude, just do it. I'm going to do 20 takes of everything. Just do it, man. You do your thing. I'll pick the one that looks the coolest, right? He really was kind of hands off with all that stuff. But that's why Rutger Hauer was perfect for him, because Rutger Hauer would make the weirdest choices that people would just be like, what am I watching? You know, it's incredible the stuff that he does. And of course, at the ending, he's got the famous 2 lines that he added. There's a whole intellectual speech that was written for the end of the film. And Ridley Scott is very, very focused on showing things, not telling things, which is a brilliant approach to making a film. I'm just going to say it, right? There's a difference between a book and a movie. You watch a movie, you read or listen to a book, right? And the English take that separation even further for plays, right? The English say, do you want to go listen to a play? Because there's nothing to watch. It's 2 people standing in a black box talking to each other, right? You listen to a play. You watch a movie. It's visual. So, at the end, there's this huge intellectual speech that's written, and he goes through all this stuff, and then he added a couple lines. There's different versions of when it happened. Some versions say that he did it the night before, but in watching this big documentary, the second writer that they got was talking about the big reading around the table the first day, right? The first thing a cast generally does, depending upon how much time you have, is get together around a table and they all sit and read the script together and they get to know each other, right? And he said in that table reading, a couple lines were added by Rutger Hauer, and then Rutger Hauer looked up at him like kind of a precocious child, like, is this okay? You know, we put this stuff in, right? And the writer was like, okay, whatever, right? And he said at the time he felt a little bit annoyed by it, but so much changed as things were going on that by the end it was like, it was just a free-for-all, kind of from the writer's point of view, right? Because he said Ridley Scott would give him a suggestion. He'd go home and make a bunch of rewrites, and then he'd come back to present the rewrites, and Ridley Scott would already have changed his mind again to do something else. He wouldn't even read it and already have an idea for how it needed to change, right? It must have been very frustrating for both writers the whole time to be kind of go through the paces like that. But, you know, that's how it goes. So he did add a couple lines. He added the all these things are going to be lost like tears in rain, right? Basically that tiny ending is what he added to it. And the honest reality is, and of course it got cut down and got cut down and cut down. There is no big philosophical speech at the end anymore, because the end of Blade Runner is he saves the cop. That's the end. He saves his life. He grabs him, picks him up, sets him down, and dies. Right? That's the movie. Now, beautiful stuff is written, and beautiful stuff should be used, of course, right? I don't want to say that all those lines should have been cut, right? Because that's just kind of silly, right? We want to be stimulated in many different ways when watching a movie, of course, right? He's got that goofy dove, right? So that when he dies, he lets go of it and the bird flies off, right? You know, it's just, you know, it's Rutger Hauer doing weird Rutger Hauer stuff, which is great. It's fun to watch, you know, but honestly, none of it's really necessary, because the end of the movie is him saving Deckard. That's the most important thing that happens. And everything else just kind of enhances it. And it's wonderful. I love the enhancements. It's great, you know, but honestly, they are just enhancements. But I don't want that to take away from what Rutger Hauer brought to this film. The replicant scenes are by far the best scenes in the film. All of it, with J.F. Sebastian, with Tyrell, with Rachel and Tyrell together, right? Really, the only negatives of this film are when Harrison Ford and Sean Young get locked in the hotel together. That's the only downfall. This other cast just kills it. They're so good. Everything they do is incredible. Okay, so casting. Yeah, that was a big one. All right. So now let's talk about more times that Ridley Scott was choosing to show things and not tell things, because they're so cool. I'm going to have my glasses for this because I've got a list. Okay, so first off, the whole opening scene. I'm not talking about flying over the city. I'm talking about literally the Leon shooting the cop. That's exposition, right? What we would expect to see in a normal film is Deckard sitting and eating at his favorite eating spot, and somebody shows up behind him and says, "You're under arrest because you need to talk to the captain." That's where the film would start. And we would hear through the exposition, which is still in the film. That's the freaky thing. We would hear through the exposition that some robots escaped. They made it to Earth. They tried to break into the Tyrell Corporation. It didn't work. So the captain had the genius idea of having all of the employees, all of the newer employees, take the Voight-Kampff test to find out if they are the replicants or not. So they do that. The cop gets shot. So now we need to catch these 4 remaining replicants. That's how the movie would start, right? Of course, you're going to open with Harrison Ford, right? That's normal Hollywood stuff. But Ridley Scott, wanting to show, not tell, just shows us the Voight-Kampff test, which is brilliant. It's such a stunning, weird scene to see Leon there, right? And this weird, the guy who plays the other cop is great. He's great. Ridley Scott actually cast him because he was standing in for Harrison Ford when they were doing the screen tests for the females, for who would play Rachel, right? Ridley Scott was like, "You kind of remind me of Harrison Ford. Would you please come do these screen tests? Because we don't want to pay Harrison Ford to do the screen tests. We'll just show him the screen tests and he can pick his favorite," right? So they bring in this weird guy, and he was so good that Ridley Scott was like, "Dude, I want to put you in the movie. I want you to play this other cop for me. Please be in this movie." So they hired him, which is excellent. So yeah, they do this whole opening scene, and Ridley Scott does the weirdest thing where he films it all, we watch it, and then we hear recordings of it throughout the beginning of the film. Harrison Ford is listening to it over and over again, trying to discover a clue as to where they might have gone, and it leads us as well, right? He literally says, the cop's like 114 Baker Street or something like that, and Leon says, "Yeah, that's where we live, the hotel." So that's our first clue. We go to the hotel, we find the little snake scale, right? That's the first clue. But he gets it out of listening to it. So every time Ridley Scott plays us those recordings, it's a different take, which is really strange. And I don't mean that they just edited it, right? That they wanted it to be shorter because we'd already seen it once. So when we see it the second time, we just need to see excerpts of it. I don't mean that. It's literally, they are saying things differently. every time they play that, it's a different take of the same lines, which is this really weird thing that kind of sticks with you. And I know that doesn't really fall under the category of show, don't tell, but it's such a unique, weird thing that I felt like it kind of needed to be put here, because it's just the way Ridley Scott's mind works. You know, he's thinking to himself, I did 20 takes of this. I liked these 3. We're going to show this one. This one will be the recording in the car, and this one is going to be the recording when they're driving through the tunnel or whatever, right? Every time they play it. And it gives you this weird sense of not, did I see that? Did I hear that right? Was that the same thing? Does he have more? You know, like weird stuff happening. I thought that was very unique and interesting. Definitely a Ridley Scott. That's the only time I've ever seen or heard anything like that. Because, of course, the continuity people are going, dude, that sounds different. That's not the same, you know, right? But Ridley Scott doesn't care. He wants it to be that way. So the overdubs to fix the confusion. So there's a part, there's an interesting story in this documentary, which I want to bring up real quick. Harrison Ford was asked to do the film. He read the script, he thought it was okay, and he wanted to meet with the director. So he got together with Ridley Scott, and the thing that he talked about with Ridley Scott, he said they had like a 4-hour meeting. And the thing that they talked about with Ridley Scott was that the overdubs were taking all of the detective work away from the detective. He was telling the audience what he found instead of Ridley Scott showing the audience what he found. And I found it kind of shocking that it came up first off at this point in the process, because later there were overdubs added that nobody liked. But this is clearly different, right? So apparently the script itself was doing a lot of describing instead of showing. And Harrison Ford caught it, and he brought it up with the director, and they decided together, yeah, you're 100% right. And I believe that Ridley Scott was already on that page. He probably already planned on making those changes, and that might be one of the reasons that he chose Harrison Ford, because he felt like they were kind of on the same page for that. Even though it hurt other aspects of the film, it really worked there. And of course, it really works when he's working with the Replicants. It's really great. Yeah, so that was an interesting show, not tell kind of thing that I didn't realize even happened. Yes. So, of course, the film comes out. It's very confusing. And Ridley Scott claims there's different versions of all these stories, of course. Ridley Scott says that it was his idea to do the overdubs. That he knew there was a problem, he saw the problem, and he wanted to fix it. And the best way to fix it was to do overdubs. So he wrote some overdubs for the film. I shouldn't say that. Lots of people love the overdubs. It's the first way I saw the film. I do not love the overdubs. Once I saw the director's cut, I really kind of fell in love with the quieter, with that other version. I just enjoyed it more. But a lot of people really like the overdubs. There's a whole section in the documentary here of famous people saying, I really enjoyed those overdubs. I actually prefer to watch that instead of the other one. So he created overdubs to fix the problems in the film. And then later he took them out. Because I think to him showing is more important than telling. And I think that he now feels like the film was ahead of its time. Which I guess I agree with. I loved it when I saw it. It just shocked me so much and blew my mind so much that I've always loved the movie. But I know that it has got more popularity, not less, over time. Right? So clearly, I guess it must have been ahead of its time. And I guess people at the time most people who watched it just didn't get it, I guess. And I don't want to say I totally got it, right? Because it's a very ambiguous thing in and of itself, right? But what I do know is I was just in awe of it. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, you know? It's so incredible to look at. And then you've got these weird ideas with these robots that are kind of more human than the humans, and they're nicer than the humans, except they kill humans, which is shocking. And I mean, it's just such a weird thing. Yeah. So he took the overdubs out because he realized that showing was better. He probably knew it from the beginning. You know, he just wanted to make sure that the film did as well as it possibly could, and that he kept his relationships with the people that he was working with. Same thing with Harrison Ford. By the time Harrison Ford was recording the actual overdubs that went in the movie, nobody was there that he knew at all. He literally walked in. He talks about it in this documentary. He walked in to do his overdubs, and nobody was there. He looked around a little. There was another room with a person madly typing away on a typewriter. And he said, "Hi, I'm here for the overdubs." And the guy apparently just went like this and kept typing. And then, after about 15 minutes, came out with some typed pages, said, "Here's your overdubs." And they sat down and did them. And that was it. And Harrison Ford was like, I knew I couldn't talk to this person about artistic choices. And I knew that any arguing that I'd done in the past was obviously completely void, because nobody's here. I'm just here to record this and then go home. And that's all he did. He just recorded it and went home. You know, and I feel like Ridley Scott was in that position as well. So he just got it done, got him plastered on, and released the film. You know, and was basically done with it until VHS and HBO and those kind of things. And it started bubbling and growing and growing. And he kind of realized, okay, my name's on this. I need to make sure that I make what I wanted to make, so that my name is associated with that, and not necessarily this thing to just get it to bring in enough money to be successful, you know. Yeah. So that's an interesting show and tell. He was forced to tell, and eventually went back to just showing. There's a very beautiful, weird moment, which I really adore, which I'm sure everybody's seen, but it really sticks out to me, and I feel like I have to mention it. There's a point where Deckard is looking at one of Rachel's photographs. It's not a photograph of... Well, that's maybe not true. I think it's a photograph of Rachel as a young girl, and then there's another woman, which I guess would be her mother, I'm assuming. But he's looking at this weird little photograph, and suddenly the camera zooms in so that the photograph is the entire screen, I think. And suddenly the photograph becomes film. The shadows in the photograph they're outside and there's shadows on them from a tree. And suddenly those shadows start to move over them. And you realize that you're watching the scene, not the photograph. And it's only for like 1 second. Right? And this is the same point in the film where we see the unicorn, which is another big thing. But the kind of shock of seeing that photograph come to life. And then he goes to work and he puts that other photograph in and he's zooming around. And there are moments in that where I believe they go to film instead of a blown up photograph again, because the quality becomes so much better. It looks like they're filming. Now, there's no movement. There's no shadows to move to tell you that it happened, but I believe it happens there as well. Right? But that leads us right to the unicorn. Now, the unicorn is a big mystery. Why is there a unicorn in this movie? What does it symbolize? What's it for? Does it mean that he's a replicant and he has weird memories that have been implanted? Blah, blah, blah. Right? All kinds of stuff. They do not... Ridley Scott, and I haven't watched every every time that he's talked over the film, but in the ones that I have watched where he does the commentary, he does not say what the unicorn represents, which is very smart as an artist, right? You don't need to give it away. Everybody should have their own interpretation. And I think it's important to state at this time, it's important to note that it's good to have your own interpretation, but it doesn't mean that you're right, right? My interpretation of the unicorn is Rachel. I believe that Deckard is realizing what he has stumbled across, what he has found, right? And I believe that Ridley Scott, they talk about in the documentary that the unicorn they were actually making Legend. They had already finished that long ago, because it doesn't show up until the director's cut, I believe. So they were literally making Legend. They had access to all these horses and this beautiful forest. So Ridley just decided, I want to film a unicorn a little bit. So he made a unicorn. The unicorn came running through the trees, and it came right up to the camera, and it shook its head right as it went past the camera. And he was like, this is incredible. I love this shot. And he ended up putting it in Blade Runner, the director's cut. So I believe that it was put in there to strengthen the Rachel and Deckard scenes in the hotel room, that he was still trying to work out how to fix those weird scenes in the hotel, you know? So he stuck the unicorn in there just to kind of indicate, at least to me, it kind of indicates that Deckard has found something incredible in Rachel, that he has captured the mythical unicorn, and he needs to protect it and love it for the rest of his life. So that's the unicorn to me, and obviously it's a way to show, not tell. And a very smart artist like Ridley Scott is not going to be like, well, I put it in because I was figuring that the scene was too short and I needed to add another 4 seconds. So I randomly had this unicorn shot, so I just thought I'd put it. Right? You're not going to do that, right? You're not going to ruin the weird, cool stuff that people might associate with your artistic choices by describing the technical reasons that they actually exist. It'd be a train wreck, right? You would ruin the work, to be honest. Yeah, so the picture's coming to life, the unicorn. Very cool, weird things just thrown in there. Another really cool kind of show, not tell, is the weird clothes of the future, right? The first replicant that gets killed, she's wearing high boots and this kind of weird bikini top thing that completely exposes her back. Her back is all skin. And she has a coat on, but the coat is clear plastic. And it's such a weird choice. And I always just wrote it off as, wow, the clothes in the future are really weird. And I know that's a factor, right? That's a part of it. They want people to look weird, to look different than us, because it's the future. But watching it this time, it really sank in for me when she's running and he shoots her in the back. That clear coat captures all the blood. Like there's this weird fountain of blood that is splattered all through this coat. And each time he shoots her, there's more blood. And her bare back is what he's shooting. Now, they do a strange thing where they show her from the front. So we see the explode. Well, we see both, I assume. We see her get shot in the back. But more memorable to me is the shot from the front with the coat with all the blood in it, and then the bullets exploding out of the front of her, right? So the bare back is not so important, I guess, perhaps. I'd have to watch it again to really analyze it, but I think the bare back didn't work quite as well as I would hope that it would. But the clear coat capturing the blood and the front exploding out, just crazy to see that woman get shot in the back like that and then crash through all that glass, you know. Very, very intense. Very, it really helps build empathy for those replicants. There's a neat shot where Harrison Ford, after Leon slaps him around a bunch, of course his mouth's all messed up and bleeding. There's a neat shot where he takes a shot of alcohol. He doesn't down the whole thing, he's just sipping it. But each time he sips, a little bit of blood seeps into the clear liquid. Very visual, very cool Blade Runner-esque shot. There's a really weird one. This is the last one I'm going to go into. This was really freaky to me. I don't think it was as successful as maybe Ridley Scott was hoping it would be. Rachel asked Deckard, did you ever take that test yourself? Referring to the Voight-Kampff test, right? Just to suggest that, you know what, I just found out I was a robot today. You might find that out today as well, right? It's a neat line. It's okay, right? It's okay. But Ridley Scott, for some reason, that one second shot where she says that line is handheld. So you get this really shaky, weird, and I'm sure in artistic discussions they were talking about how this is the peak of her mental breakdown, right? This is the moment where she realizes she's a robot, and that means that everybody else could be a robot, and so we want her to be agitated, and they do this weird handheld thing, and I don't think that it works, to be honest with you. I don't think it's a good choice. It just sticks out too much. It's so strange. All right, so now I want to talk about chicken heads. In the book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the planet Earth is devastated. It's not a place that normal people should live. It's a mess. So everybody's scrambling to get off world. So they don't just want everybody to leave, I guess. I'm not sure why. But they determine that you have to either have a certain IQ or a certain level of physical ability. You have to have both in order to be able to go off-world. Now, that is not a thing in this film, really, but it's sort of there. There is a line where Pris says, J.F. Sebastian is describing that he ages quicker than he should. Accelerated decrepitude, I think is what they call it. And she asks him, is that why you haven't gone off world? And he says, yes, I couldn't pass the physical. Now, I don't know if that means they're also doing IQ tests. I don't know, right? The physical could literally mean if we put you on this spaceship, it will kill you, right? That's possible. It takes a lot of training to be an astronaut because of the G-forces and all that kind of stuff. That could be a factor in this world. I don't know. They don't go any more into it at all. And does that mean they're doing IQ tests? I don't know. There's a lot of smart people. There's the eyeball maker, right? J.F. Sebastian works in genetics. He's clearly really smart. Literally, the lead of the company, Tyrell, who's supposed to be some kind of superhuman genius, is on the planet, right? So I don't know. I don't know what that's about. But Deckard is such a bad cop. I feel like he might be a chicken head. I hate to say it, but it's so crazy that they bring him in because he's supposedly the best, right? And the first robot kicks the crap out of him and is about to kill him, except people walk into the dressing room and it scares her and she takes off. So he was saved by pure luck, right? When he's at home, after he meets Rachel, he goes home and he's in the elevator and he's trying to relax, and suddenly he realizes there's somebody behind him, and he whips around with his gun, and it's Rachel, right? A replicant is right behind him, and she could have killed him. That wasn't her goal, of course, but she could have killed him at any moment, right? He didn't even know until he got to the top, till he was basically at his place. I used to think that she was outside the elevator, but no, the doors don't open until after he pulls his gun, I believe. It's just weird, right? She had plenty of time to take him out if that was what she was doing. And then, of course, after he kills the first replicant, he runs into Leon. Leon kicks the crap out of him, and the only reason he survives is because Rachel shoots Leon. Then he fights Pris. Pris kicks the crap out of him, right? And the only reason that he's able to survive that fight is because I kind of write this off. Pris is what they call a pleasure model, so she's not a combat model. So she likes to do backflips and stuff, right? She likes to have fun. So she backflips away from him because she wants to backflip back and jump on him and kill him. But he has a gun. So he gets his gun and he shoots her, right? And he has to shoot her like 4 times to kill her. It's a crazy scene. It's crazy. But she beats the crap out of him. A pleasure model beats the crap out of him before he can actually deal with her. And he's seen what she looks like. So then, of course, fighting Roy kicks the crap out of him, and he's going to die, and Roy saves his life. Like, he is the worst, you know? He knows what they look like. But there's this whole scene where he has a photograph. There's this new photograph taken. And he puts the photograph in the machine. And he zooms all around. And he finds, in a mirror reflection, inside of a photograph, he finds the first replicant. And she has a snake tattooed to her face. You can't tell it's a snake because the picture's so blurry, right? I couldn't even really tell there was a tattoo. I thought it could have been a shadow, but there's a tattoo on her face. Okay, so keep in mind, he's seen what they look like, but now he has a picture of her, right? So he takes the picture and he realizes, oh, this scale, this weird flake that I've found might be a scale. And now he's got this picture of her face with this weird thing on her face, right? And he goes to a person and he says, can you look at this? And they zoom way in and they're like, yeah, this is manufactured. This is really high quality work. I can tell you who made this. And he's like, cool. Is it a fish? And she's like, no. It's a snake. And he's like, oh. So then he takes it and he goes to the person who made it and he says, who did you sell it to? And he basically has to beat the guy up, right? Who did you sell it to? And he tells him who he sold it to. So then he goes and meets that guy. And he's like, I have no idea who that picture is. I don't know. I don't care. So he just sits there for a while. And eventually a person comes out and does a snake dance. And he kind of figures out that that's the robot. He doesn't give her a Voight-Kampff test, right? He just searches her dressing room for clues. And when she attacks him, he just kills her. After getting his butt kicked. So I feel like we're putting things together much faster than he is. And I feel like that could imply that he's a chicken head, that he couldn't pass the IQ test to leave. And then you've got his boss. His boss, great actor, right? Harrison Ford's a great actor. His boss is a great actor, and the dialogue between the two of them is so weird and so stilted. I feel like, number one, I know the writer is trying to do some stupid film noir thing, right? He's trying to imitate an old style, which is just a shame, right? We don't need any of that. I'll be honest with you. When we first turned on The Expanse and there was that cop with the fedora talking to the prostitute, I was like, I do not want to watch this thing. This is going to be trash. And for me, it was. I know it was successful. I know people enjoyed it. But honestly, it was just not. If a fedora gets busted out, I'm kind of over it. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to watch it. But anyways, these two were having this conversation, and the head of the police is very dramatic. Like he's talking like talk about Beauty and the Beast. She's both. Right? He's got these really stupid, weird lines, and they're really dramatic. And he has to arrest Deckard to get him to come in to talk to him. He might be a chicken head, right? It's possible that he's a chicken head, right? Tyrell, the original idea for Tyrell was that they actually built this weird head of Tyrell's that Rutger Hauer was going to crush. And when he crushed it, a bunch of springs and bolts were going to burst out of this head. And we were going to realize that Tyrell was an android, right? Not a Nexus 6, not filled with blood and everything, but he was a robot. And we wouldn't learn it until Roy crushed his head. Now, they didn't have time to do all that stuff. They built the head. The guy said the head cost $10,000 to make, but they didn't use it. They just had him squish Tyrell's face a little bit, and then they put little tubes and shot blood out, so it looked like his eyes were getting pulped out, right? Which, by the way, I gotta say, being an actor, working with Rutger Hauer, who's clearly very in the moment and very weird, I would be kind of scared to have Rutger Hauer put his thumbs against my eyeballs and then go like this, right? Like, I don't know. I hope they had some safety precautions worked out, because it looks terrible and it sounds terrible. But originally in the film, he was going to be a robot, right? He wasn't even a human on the planet. It was a robot on the planet. And then Rutger Hauer would have to go he'd go up another floor, and he'd literally find Tyrell, who'd been dead for years. He'd find him in this casket and dead. And to me, that solves a tiny part of the problem that I have with the film, which is, why in the world did they leave Pris in the Bradbury building while they went to kill people? You know? Because he killed J.F. Sebastian. Of course they're going to go to J.F. Sebastian's house. They know J.F. Sebastian is how they got in. Why did they leave Pris there? Why wasn't Pris waiting in the elevator? You know? I can understand not bringing her all the way because you don't want anything to go wrong. You don't want her to get hurt. Why wasn't she waiting in the lobby? Why wasn't she waiting across the street in the coffee shop? Right? If he went in and said, you need to extend my life, and he said, fine, let's do it. You know? Then he would have had to call Pris and say, Pris, get over here. He's going to do it. You know? And the robots are kind of chicken-headed. You know, I get it, I guess. But they're supposed to be as smart as the people who designed them. So maybe that does mean that the eyeball guy is a chicken head. I don't know. This whole movie could just be chicken heads, right? People that could not get off the planet Earth. And they're just kind of stupid. And they act kind of stupid in this movie at times. I think they might all be chicken heads. I think there must have been a discussion early on about how smart are these people, because they're not very smart. I'll tell you that. I don't understand why, if there were 4 incredibly dangerous replicants on Earth, why Tyrell would ever let anyone into his room. Why would he, you know, if Sebastian figured out how to beat him at chess, he would just say, wow, you got me. Thanks, man. Bye. Right? That would be it. He just would have lost there's no way he'd be like, come on up, let's talk about it, even though I've got these horrible killers trying to get into my room all the time. You know, I mean, there's just dumb choices, but yeah, they might be chicken heads. They might all be chicken heads. So I've got just a couple other quick things that I want to add to this. I want to make sure I get everything talked about in this, because we're not going to do another one of these, of course. So things that I found different in the final version based on other versions that I've seen. This obviously is not a list of everything that was possibly changed because that'd be insane, you know. But there's just a few things that I noticed that are slightly different that I wanted to point out. Number one, David Byrne and Brian Eno made a record called My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. And it has a song on it, which I believe is called Quran, and it's people chanting from the Quran. And they've put it over music, and it's this very interesting kind of world music, strange thing that they build over this chanting. So when they released the record, word got back to the people who made the original recording of it, because it was all sampled, except for the stuff that they built around it, of course. All the chanting was sampled. And word got back to them, and they said, that's disrespectful. We don't want you to make that song. So they said, okay. And on subsequent releases, they stopped including that song on the releases of the album. That song was actually also used in Blade Runner. It's an excellent song. It might be the best song on the album, unfortunately. But it was also in Blade Runner, which I really loved hearing that. But in this version, I believe it's taken out. I did not catch it. I didn't hear it. I didn't notice it. I think they took it out because they didn't want to be disrespectful to that culture, of course. Other differences. In the beginning, when Leon is taking the Voight-Kampff test, there's a heartbeat sound, which I believe has always been there, but I believe that all of the sound design was remastered. And the only time that I really noticed that, well, first off was the Quran song, but also in the beginning, they really pump up that heartbeat when Leon is starting to freak out about not helping the turtle. So that kind of stuck out to me a tiny bit. I was surprised by that. One very interesting one is they changed a line. Roy used to say, when he's confronting Tyrell, he used to say, I want more life, and then he said the F word. But they actually changed that to him saying, I want more life, Father. And this really stuck out to me because for some reason it's always a line that stuck with me, first off. Probably because it has a swear word in it and I saw it when I was young, right? But also, the actor is so good that if you change the line, he would have said it differently. If the line was, I want more life, Father, he would have said that very differently than I want more life, effer, right? That would have been a big, different way to read it. And he didn't record over the whole line. They only changed the word Father. So he still has the same intention for I want more life. So it sounds very strange. That one really stuck out to me. Also, in that same section, he turns around. After he kills Tyrell, he turns around to kill Sebastian. And I don't know if they just brought up this line so that we could actually hear it or if they put it in. I'm not sure which, but I'd never heard it before. When he's going towards Sebastian to kill him, he says, I'm sorry, Sebastian, come. And that was new to me as well. And now just a couple other interesting facts. The original script, way back, I believe, when they were really starting to bring a script together, I believe they already had the director on board. But the opening scene of the script was Deckard shows up to this farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere. And he cautiously gets out of his vehicle, looks around, and then heads up and goes inside the place, and nobody's there. But there's a pot of soup boiling. So he just has a seat, decides to sit and wait. And after a little while, this huge guy walks in, notices him, looks at him, goes in, stirs the soup, and comes back into the room, and Deckard kills him. And that was the original opening of Blade Runner. They never filmed it or anything. That was way early. But, as you're already aware, I'm sure, that's the opening of the new Blade Runner film, which is kind of interesting and fun. You know, that they would just grab that scene and bring it over. At the end of the theatrical version, Deckard and Rachel are escaping up north. And apparently up north is gorgeous, right? It's super sunny. There's green everywhere. It's very beautiful. It's like it is today for us. I don't know why anyone would stay in LA in all of that smog and all that stuff if, 4 hours north is just gorgeous, right? That's clearly not really what they had planned, but they felt they needed to put that in just to make the audiences happy. So they're escaping up north, and Ridley Scott wanted shots of the mountains, of the huge forests and all that stuff. So they got a helicopter. They had another unit go up, and they said that they flew around for like 6 days, and they couldn't get anything because it was too foggy. Which sounds crazy to me, but I guess it could happen. So 6 days completely wasted. They couldn't get anything. But the director still wanted those shots. So he reached out through his contacts to Stanley Kubrick. And he said, I know that you shot a lot of stuff for The Shining, for that opening of The Shining. Do you have anything that wasn't used in The Shining that we could use in Blade Runner? And Stanley Kubrick said, sure, and he delivered all this stuff over, and he said there was reels upon reels of shots of the tops of mountains, he said Montana, but I thought they were filming in Oregon, or in Colorado, I can't remember, I think they filmed in Oregon, but he said Montana, and it may be Montana, I honestly don't know. But there was all these shots. So if you watch the theatrical version, that ending scene, a lot of that stuff was shot by a Stanley Kubrick crew getting shots for him for The Shining, which is very interesting. And literally, some of those shots are, of course, them following the Volkswagen up the mountain trail. Of course, none of that. They didn't use anything in Blade Runner that was used in The Shining. It was only the stuff that they didn't use from The Shining, but it is that time that they were shooting. It's all from that same time period. Also, things that influenced Ridley Scott to make this film. Number one, he was set up to do Dune. He was going to direct that film for De Lorenzo. And of course he didn't. That turned out to be David Lynch, right? And as they started getting going, his brother passed away. So his life kind of fell apart for a little bit, of course, right? So Dune didn't work out. It went to David Lynch, and all of that is history, right? And we'll probably go into that eventually if I haven't already. And he decided, okay, fine, I'll do Blade Runner. He'd already seen the script. I believe he turned him down because he was doing Dune. But then once his brother passed away, and a little bit of time passed, Blade Runner was there, so he decided to just do Blade Runner. Probably his main influence for it was the heavy metal magazine. Metal Hurlant, I believe, is another title for it. I feel like it's kind of the same thing. Personally, I've always been a huge fan of that kind of 70s science fiction art for the spaceships. My personal favorite for that type of art is Chris Foss, right? I really love his spaceship art. I got this really great book. It's got all kinds of different spaceships that he drew over time. It's got the stuff that he was doing for the original production of Dune, which just completely fell apart. It never even got off the ground. But they did a lot of, pre-work for it. So it's got all that kind of stuff in it. I've got a couple other books that aren't necessarily Chris Foss. It's just more spaceship art, from kind of 70s, basically. I just always really loved that stuff. And he did some work with heavy metal. So that's kind of my connection to that. But that was a huge influence. And I do really feel like, particularly that blimp the giant blimp that flies over the city with the ads on it, come to the outer worlds or whatever, that really looks like Chris Foss to me, and I think that that's extremely cool. So those are kind of the two influences that I came up with in doing my research for this. All right, so I just want to talk last. This is it. I just want to talk about novels versus movies, right? Telling versus showing. And how close is this to the novel? I would say right off the bat, it's not close. It is not close, right? The novel explores different themes, the theme of religion and marriage, right? The mood machine. There are other aspects to the novel that are not in this. The novel does have Deckard and Rachel sleep together, but it doesn't work out, right? There are consequences to that action because he's married, and she literally shows up and chucks his goat off the roof, which I think is awesomely brilliant. Yeah, but in this, they fall in love and they're together forever, right? But I do believe that it does capture the basic heart of the novel. If you run with the idea that empathy is a very important key piece of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, then in that aspect, Blade Runner captures it. Empathy is so important in this film. Deckard's journey from calling Rachel it to spending the rest of his life with her is the kind of the point, right? The building of that empathy. I don't think they're very successful at it. I hate to say it. Our empathy goes with the other ones. It's not. Our empathy's not with Rachel. It's just not there. Their scenes are so belabored and weird and aggressive that we can't get on board with it. But the other ones we are on board with. People don't quote Harrison Ford when they quote Blade Runner. They quote the androids. They're what people walk away with, what stays with them. So I do believe that this film captures the heart of the novel, and there is an interesting point in the documentary where they talk about Philip K. Dick actually getting to see about 10 minutes of the film. He came in kind of early, and it's lucky because he passed away, right? I mean, he literally only saw 10 minutes of this movie before he passed away, before the film came out. So they put together about 10 minutes of special effects that they'd done, right? The car flying over the city, the giant pyramid, the car landing on the top of the cop station. They got about 10 minutes together, and they brought him in to watch it. And he said that this is the story, right? Every one of these Hollywood stories that you hear, somebody else is going to tell it different, right? But the story that I see in the documentary is that it blew his mind. That he literally was questioning how they could have reached into his head and pulled out his exact images of the future and put them on film. So if that is true, if he said that and he believed it, then I wholeheartedly state this film captured the heart of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. It's the way it should look. It's the way it should feel, even though it is not it doesn't cover nearly as much as the book does. The book does a lot more than the film does, but the film does capture the heart of it. Okay, well, thank you guys. That's a lot. That's a long thing. I'm going to have to edit this down a little bit, I think. But thank you so much for watching. If you like it, hit like, please. There's a bunch more like this kind of stuff, so go ahead and subscribe as well. And have a great day.